be kidding me! You can't just destroy my car!
I was halfway into my boots, getting ready to go fishing, when the explosion shook the windows. Not a normal crash. Not thunder. A deep metallic blast that rattled the porch railing and sent birds lifting off the fence line all at once. For half a second, I thought a propane tank had blown somewhere on the property. I grabbed the door frame and leaned outside, just as a cloud of steam burst up from the far end of my driveway. A white SUV sat crooked between my gate posts, horns screaming nonstop like something was dying under the hood. My stomach dropped. I didn't even finish tying the second boot. I took off across the gravel barefoot on one side, gravel biting into my heel, heart hammering harder with every step. As I got closer, I saw it. The front end of the SUV lifted slightly off the ground, oil streaming down onto the dirt. Two thick steel posts jammed straight through the undercarriage like it had been speared. The driver door flew open. Out came the same woman who'd been terrorizing my property for weeks. Phone already up, face red and twisted with panic and rage. "You've got to be kidding me," she screamed. "You can't just destroy my car." Behind her, two more vehicles were slamming brakes and trying to reverse, drivers shouting over each other, engines whining in tight panic. My wife rolled onto the porch behind me, oxygen machine humming softly in the morning air. She stopped when she saw the wreck, eyes wide, hand tightening around the armrest. For weeks, this woman had been ripping across our land like it belonged to her. Through gates, through livestock paths, straight past the small garden my wife used as her escape from hospital rooms and four poles. Now her SUV was wrecked, frozen, trapped in place like a mistake that couldn't be undone. The quiet fishing morning was gone. The calm was gone. Whatever line she thought she could keep crossing, it ended right here. 3 months earlier, I didn't even know this woman existed. We'd moved out to this land for quiet, real quiet. Wind in the grass, insects buzzing at dusk, the kind of silence that actually lets your nervous system clench after a hard life. My wife needed that kind of calm more than anything. Hospital walls and waiting rooms had already taken enough from her. The first time I heard an engine on the back stretch of the property, I assumed someone had taken a wrong turn. I followed the sound out past the fence line and found a white SUV idling near one of my gates. The driver window slid down, and a woman leaned out wearing sunglasses big enough to hide half her face. "You're blocking an access road," she said, like she was reading from script. I looked behind her. All I saw was my fence, my pasture, and a locked gate that had been there longer than either of us. "This is private land," I told her. "Public roads half a mile back the other way." She tilted her head slightly, smiling in a way that wasn't friendly at all. "We've always driven through here. There's infrastructure back there for the neighborhood. You'll get used to it." Then she rolled the window up and drove straight around my gate, cutting through the grass like the conversation never happened. That was the moment my gut tightened. Not because of the shortcut, but because of how comfortable she was ignoring a clear boundary. Over the next few days, that one pass turned into 2, then 3. Always the same white SUV. Same speed. Same confidence. Dust clouds drifting across the pasture like she owned the place. The cattle started reacting before I did. Head snapping up. Hooves shifting nervously. One of my steers bolted and clipped a fence post hard enough to bend the wire. Why wife stopped sitting outside in the mornings. The engine noise made her tense in ways she tried to hide, that I told myself it was probably temporary. Some misunderstanding that would burn itself out. But deep down, I already knew better. People who ignore you the first time rarely stop the second time. And she was just getting started up by the second week. The word misunderstanding didn't fit anymore. She wasn't just passing through. She was timing it. Every morning around the same window, that white SUV would appear like clockwork, cutting across the back stretch of my land, dust rolling behind her tires. If I was outside repairing fence or checking feed, she wouldn't even acknowledge me. Just drove past like I was a fence post. I tried to flag her down once. She slowed just enough to roll the window halfway. "You can't keep doing this," I said, keeping my voice level. "You're running livestock here. You're damaging property." She sighed dramatically, like I was the inconvenience. "Look," she said, tapping the steering wheel. We've used this access for years. I don't have time to reroute because someone bought land late in the game. Late in the game. Like my home was a clerical error. Then she accelerated, gravel snapping against my boots. That was the first time anger really sparked. Not loud anger, but the slow-burning kind that sits heavy behind your ribs that a few days later, one of my younger cows spooked when the SUV came tearing through. She slammed into a fence corner hard enough to snap a post. I spent half the afternoon resetting wire and calming a herd that didn't understand why their safe space suddenly felt dangerous and why wife noticed before I said anything. She stopped planting in the mornings. Started keeping the porch door closed even when the weather was perfect. The engine noise made her shoulders jump. A small flinch she tried to pretend wasn't there. One evening she said quietly, "It feels like we're being watched when she comes through." That sentence stuck with me. Not watched like surveillance. Watched like someone testing how much they could get away with. That I called the county office and asked if there was any recorded easement or access agreement tied to my property. The clerk checked and called me back later. "Nothing on file," she said. "No legal access rights through your parcel." That should have settled it. Instead, the SUV kept coming, faster, louder, more careless, like she was daring me to stop her. And the more she pushed, the more I realized this wasn't just about convenience anymore, that IT was about control. The next time she came through, she didn't come alone. That I heard engines stacking up outside the gate. Not one, not two, but a small convoy. When I stepped out, 3 SUVs were already lined up in my driveway like they were pulling into a mall parking lot. Her white SUV led the parade. She climbed out smiling like she was hosting an open house. "Perfect timing," she said. "I'm walking the board through the access route today." Before I could respond, half a dozen people spilled out behind her, clipboards in hand, phones raised, scanning my land like buyers at a property showing. One guy crouched down to photograph my fence latch. Another woman started pacing off distances with exaggerated steps, mumbling numbers to herself. A third leaned casually against my gate post like it was a piece of patio furniture. "Hold up," I said. "You don't get to tour my land." She tilted her sunglasses down just enough to look amused. "Oh, relax. We're just documenting infrastructure access. It'll take 5 minutes." 5 minutes turned into 20. They wandered deeper than they had any right to, pointing, whispering, snapping photos like they were planning renovations instead of trespassing. One of them joked about how this land would look cleaned up and organized. I caught that phrase and felt my jaw lock. Why cattle shifted uneasily in the pasture, bunching together the way animals do when something feels wrong. The noise alone was enough to throw off their calm. From the porch, my wife watched everything unfold, hands gripping the armrests of her chair. I could see the tension pulling her shoulders upward like invisible wires. This was supposed to be her safe place, not a stage for strangers with entitlement issues. When I told them again to leave, she finally waved the group back toward their vehicles like she was dismissing staff. "All right, everyone, we've got what we need," she said cheerfully. "Thanks for your patience." My patience was gone. As they pulled away, dust coating the air and my nerves, I noticed fresh tire marks cutting closer to the garden than ever before. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just cutting across my property anymore. She was staking a claim. And people who start claiming things usually don't stop on their own. After that little tour, the drive-bys didn't slow down. They multiplied. Some mornings it was just her SUV cutting through like usual. Other days, a second vehicle followed behind her. Different colors, different drivers, same behavior. Fussed, confident, untouchable. Like my land had been quietly absorbed into someone else's routine, that I started finding small things wrong that didn't make sense at first. At a gate left unlatched. Fence wire loosened where no animal could have reached it. Fresh tire tracks running closer and closer to the garden, like someone was testing how far they could push without crossing an obvious line. The cattle picked up on it long before I admitted it out loud. They started bunching up when engines came through, ears twitching, bodies tight. One afternoon, a young steer spooked hard and slammed into a fence corner. Snapped the post clean. I spent the rest of the evening resetting wire while mosquitoes ate me alive and anger simmered quietly under my skin. The stress started bleeding into the house. That is why wife stopped sitting outside completely. She kept the windows closed even when the weather was perfect. The sound of engines made her jaw tighten in ways she couldn't hide anymore. One night she said, barely above a whisper, "I don't feel relaxed here lately." That sentence hit harder than any confrontation ever could. This place was supposed to help her heal, not tighten the screws. I tried the polite route. Phone calls to the neighborhood office. Messages that never got returned. A formal complaint that vanished into voicemail purgatory. Nothing changed. If anything, the driving got more aggressive. Faster passes. Less hesitation. Dust clouds drifting straight across the porch like deliberate disrespect. I started sleeping lighter. Waking at every engine sound. Running mental scenarios in the dark like my brain couldn't shut the situation off. That's when the realization settled in. Slow, uncomfortable, unavoidable. She wasn't going to stop because I asked. She wasn't going to stop because it was wrong. She was going to stop only when something forced her to, and I hadn't decided yet what that something was going to be. The day it truly crossed the line wasn't dramatic at first. It was quiet. Ordinary. The kind of morning that tricks you into thinking nothing bad could happen. My wife was outside for the first time in a week, sitting near the edge of the garden with a light blanket over her knees. She'd been having a decent stretch health-wise, and the fresh air was doing her good. I stayed close, pretending to organize tools while really just enjoying the fact that she looked peaceful again. Then the engine sound came back. Too fast. Too close. I turned just in time to see the white SUV tearing in through the gate, throwing dust and gravel straight toward the porch. The cattle scattered in different directions. One of them bolted hard enough to slam into a fence rail with a crack that made my stomach drop. The SUV didn't slow. The tires clipped the edge of the garden bed and sprayed loose dirt and flower debris across the yard. A small wooden stake snapped and flipped end over end through the air. My wife flinched violently. Her hand flew to her chest. The oxygen machine hissed louder as her breathing sped up. For a split second, her eyes went wide in that terrified, helpless way that makes your blood go cold. I ran to her. She was shaking, not crying, just trying to get her breathing under control while her body fought panic and exhaustion at the same time. "I'm okay," she kept saying, the kind of okay people say when they absolutely are not. I helped her back inside and sat with her until the shaking eased. The doctor later called it a stress response. Nothing medically catastrophic, but a warning shot we couldn't ignore. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the way the tires slid past her flowers, the way her hand grabbed for air, the way that SUV never even hesitated. That wasn't inconvenience anymore. That was risk, real risk. And the truth finally settled in with uncomfortable clarity. If I kept doing nothing, eventually something irreversible was going to happen. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew I was done waiting. The house didn't feel calm anymore. It felt like everything was holding its breath. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard an engine. Sometimes it was just wind in the trees. Sometimes it really was tires on gravel somewhere far off, and my body would already be tense before my brain caught up. I started leaving my boots by the bed. That's when I knew this thing had gotten into my head. During the day, I found myself drifting toward the windows more than I should, watching the driveway, watching the gate, waiting for that familiar engine note to cut through the air again. When it did, it never disappointed. One afternoon, she came through so fast the rear end fishtailed slightly as she corrected the turn. Gravel sprayed across the fence line like shrapnel. If she'd overcorrected by another inch, she would have clipped the post and spun straight toward the porch. I stood there imagining the trajectory longer than I should have. That image stayed with me. I installed the first hidden camera that night, hands moving quietly in the dark like I was sneaking around my own property. The next morning, I added another angle, then a third. Reviewing the footage felt like watching a slow-motion accident that hadn't happened yet. Her speed kept creeping up. Her braking kept disappearing. Her confidence kept growing. One clip showed her phone glowing in her hand while she drove, eyes down, steering one-handed as she blasted past the gate. That was the moment my stomach dropped. She wasn't just careless. She was reckless. I started catching myself doing math in my head. Distances, reaction time, stopping distance on loose gravel. I didn't like where those numbers landed. My wife noticed a shift before I said anything. "You're not sleeping," she said one evening, studying my face. I shrugged it off. Just a lot on my mind. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I could feel something building toward impact. And whatever happened next wasn't going to be small. The decision didn't arrive like a big dramatic moment. It came while I was filling a shallow trench near the gate, tamping gravel back into place with the heel of my boot. I stood up, wiped sweat off my forehead, and looked down the drive the same way I had 100 times before. Only this time, I didn't feel uncertain. I felt finished. Finished waiting. Finished hoping she'd suddenly grow a conscience. Finished letting fear make the rules in my own home. That afternoon, I made a few phone calls I'd been putting off. Not angry calls. Calm ones. I spoke to a contractor who specialized in heavy-duty security barriers. I asked questions about load ratings, deployment speed, and how systems behaved under real-world impact, not brochure promises. I asked what stopped a vehicle cleanly without turning into a lawsuit nightmare. He laughed once and said, "You planning to stop a tank or a midlife crisis?" "Something expensive and moving too fast," I replied. The next day, I posted new signage at the gate. Private property. No unauthorized access. Large enough that no one could pretend they didn't see it. I documented everything. Photos. Timestamps. Installation permis. Written notices mailed certified. Quiet paper trails that don't feel dramatic until you need them badly. I still didn't tell my wife the full plan, just that I was handling it. She trusted me. That trust sat heavy on my shoulders in the best and worst way. Meanwhile, the drive-bys continued. If anything, they got louder. One evening, she leaned out her window as she passed and shouted something I couldn't quite hear, but the tone carried just fine. Mocking. Confident. Untouchable. I didn't react. I just watched her disappear down the drive, mentally counting the days. Because the line had been drawn, and she was about to cross it one last time. The crash wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning of the mess. Within seconds of the impact, her horn was screaming nonstop, steam boiling out from under the hood, and 3 other vehicles jammed up behind her in the narrow drive, like a bad traffic accident in the middle of nowhere. People piled out of their cars, confused and shouting over each other. "What happened? Is she okay? Call someone." She stumbled out of the driver's seat, holding her phone up like a shield, already recording, already narrating her own version of reality. "This man sabotaged my car," she yelled into the camera. "This is criminal. This is what happens when extremists take over private land." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She tried to step forward toward the steel posts, slipped slightly on leaking fluid, and had to catch herself on the door frame. The confidence she'd worn for months was gone, replaced by raw panic. Neighbors started showing up. First one truck, then another. Curious faces peering down the drive. Someone recognized her immediately and whispered her name. A few people started filming too. She realized the audience had flipped. Her shouting got louder, wilder, less controlled. "You can't do this to me. I run this neighborhood," she screamed at me, pointing like she was used to people backing down when she did that. Nobody moved. Sirens began growing louder in the distance. That's when the reality finally landed on her face. Not anger. Fear that her live stream comments started exploding. People asking why she was driving through private land, why warning signs were posted, why her story didn't match what everyone was seeing on camera. She tried to end the stream, but fumbled with the screen, fingers shaking too badly to hit the button. When the sheriff's vehicle pulled into view at the end of the drive, the color drained from her face completely. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This wasn't supposed to happen. And for the first time since she'd ever set foot on my land, she looked small. The sheriff didn't argue with her. He didn't posture. He didn't lecture. He simply watched the footage. One clip, then another. Then the slow-motion angle where her SUV blasted past the warning sign like it wasn't even there. He handed my phone back and turned toward her. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you were trespassing at speed on clearly posted private property." She tried to laugh it off. The sound came out thin and shaky. "I've driven that route forever. Everybody does." The sheriff shook his head once. Not legally. He pulled out his ticket book. The scratch of pen on paper felt louder than the sirens ever had. Reckless driving, trespassing, mandatory court appearance. A written warning that turned into arrest if ignored again. Each citation tore free with a sharp snap, like doors slamming shut one by one. Her shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of her face as the numbers sank in. The woman who used to bark orders and roll through gates without slowing now stood there blinking too fast, hands trembling around a useless phone. "This is insane," she whispered. "He set me up." One deputy looked up from the wrecked SUV. "Nobody made you hit the gas, ma'am." That ended the conversation. The tow truck hauled what was left of her luxury SUV away in slow, grinding inches. Metal groaned. Glass crunched. The machine she once treated like a battering ram left on the back of someone else's hook. People drifted off quietly. No cheating. No victory lap. Just a strange calm that follows a storm when the air finally settles. Later that evening, the rods were still leaning by the door. The fishing trip never happened, but something better did. My wife and I sat outside as the sun slid low across the land. Warm light catching the edges of the garden she'd fought so hard to keep alive. A breeze moved through the leaves softly, careful now, like the property itself was exhaling as she leaned against my shoulder. "You hear that?" she asked. I listened. No engines. No gravel popping under tires. No tension crawling up my spine. Just wind in the trees. Birds settling in for the night. The quiet I'd almost forgotten existed. That morning had started with a blast that shook the house. It ended with silence that healed it. And for the first time in a long time, silence felt like victory.